بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا كريم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إلا المصلين الذين هم على صلاتهم دائمون والذين في أموالهم حق معلوم للسائل والمحروم والذين يصدقون بيوم الدين والذين هم من عذاب ربهم مشفقون إن عذاب ربهم غير مأمون والذين هم لفروجهم حافظون إلا على أزواجهم أو ما ملكت أيمانهم فإنهم غير ملومين فمن ابتغى وراء ذلك فأولئك هم العادون والذين هم لأماناتهم وعهدهم راعون والذين هم بشهاداتهم قائمون والذين هم على صلاتهم يحافظون أولئك في جنات مكرمون. So after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentioned that mankind is generally halua, yani anxious and impatient. He mentioned the exception to this. Who is not impatient and who is not anxious? They are the believers, and from their characteristics, from their most important characteristics, is that they uphold the salah. They are from those who uphold their salawat and preserve their salawat. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from them. إِلَّا الْمُصَلِّينَ. For these musallin, these are the exception to the ones who are impatient and to the ones who are anxious. For as we mentioned last week, the believer, when evil touches them, they are patient. And if good befalls them, they thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they are patient upon the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this time of goodness. For the believer, when good or bad touches them, they return it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that it is all from the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For these musallin that Allah is mentioning, they are the exception. But not just because they are musallin, they have a number of other characteristics as well, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to mention. إِلَّا الْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَى صَلَاتِهِمْ دَائِمُونَ. الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَى صَلَاتِهِمْ دَائِمُونَ. They are da'imun in their prayers. And da'imun means that they are steadfast and they are consistent and they fulfill the obligation of salah on time, every time, 5 times a day, the salat of the day and the salat of the night. They pray them on time and in jama'ah. And subhanallah, they fulfill their salat with its arkan and wajibat and as many of the sunan as they can. But the salah has arkan. If you leave one of the rukn out, the rak'ah or the salah is invalid. And if you leave out one of the wajibat, then you must make up with it with sajdat as-sahu. And if you leave out one of the sunan, then there is no harm upon you. And the mufassirun also said, da'im can also mean still and tranquil. For they are tranquil and they are still and they have tuma'nina in their salah. For the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, لا يبولن أحدكم في الماء الدائم. Do not urinate in the water which is still, the one that does not flow and does not move. Do not urinate in it, because it will collect the najasa and the najasa will not move on. For they are still in their salat and they have khushu' in their salat. For it could mean this and it could mean this, steadfast, and they also have khushu' and tuma'nina in their salat. إِلَّا الْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَى صَلَاتِهِمْ دَائِمُونَ والذين في أموالهم حق معلوم. For this is another characteristic of the believers. In their wealth, in their amwal, في أموالهم, there is a haqq, ma'loom, a haqq, a right which is known. And this is specifically talking about the zakat, because the zakat is a haqq which is known. It is defined how much it is. Yes, whether it is gold or silver, or whether it is urud al-tijara, yani the stock that you have, or whether it is cattle, or whether it is what is grown from the earth. This zakat has a known amount. How much do you have to pay? And it is a very small amount that you have to pay in comparison to what you get to keep. And this shows the adl of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the adl of this deen, the justice of this deen, and that it does not oppress anyone, subhanallah. وَالَّذِينَ فِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ حَقٌّ مَعْلُومٌ لِلسَّائِلِ وَالْمَحْرُومِ. This haqq which is ma'loom, it is given to the sa'il and it is given to the mahroom. For the sa'il is the one who is in need, the faqir and the miskin. But he goes and he asks the people, and it is better not to ask people, but they still ask. Maybe because they fear for their children and for their family, and maybe they wouldn't ask themselves, but they're asking for the well-being of their family. For if they come and ask from zakatul mal, then there is no harm in giving them if they are the rightful recipients of zakatul mal, if they come and ask. And also the mahroom. The mahroom is essentially the one who is also needy, and he doesn't have the skill to earn a living, as Ibn Kathir he mentioned. But they do not go around asking the people, for the people think that they are well off and they do not need, and therefore they deprive them of their haqq, or they deprive them of the zakat. This is why they are mahroom. They have been deprived of their haqq because they do not ask. You may ask, how do we give our zakat to someone if we don't know their situation and their condition? And as the fuqaha said, no one lives inside a vacuum, as they say. For everyone knows someone. Mathalan, your neighbor, you know that he is poor and he is not well off because of the interactions that you have with him. Then you can say this person is a recipient of the zakat, but he does not ask. Give him, he is worthy of it. He is a worthy recipient of it. But these believers, they always take a portion of the haqq from their mal, and they do not forget it, and they are not deceived by the amount of wealth that they have, and that this is the haqq of Allah, and they make sure that they pay their zakat on time, every time, and they are diligent in this, and they do not lose track of it, because subhanallah, not to pay your zakat is from the great sins. So keep track of this great ibadah. وَالَّذِينَ فِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ حَقٌّ مَعْلُومٌ لِلسَّائِلِ وَالْمَحْرُومِ وَالَّذِينَ يُصَدِّقُونَ بِيَوْمِ الدِّينِ. So this is another one of their characteristics. They believe in Yawm al-Din, the day of recompense. For as Shaykh al-Barrak, he said, their belief in the day of recompense, their belief in the day of judgment is implied, because a person does not pray and does not give zakat if they disbelieve in Yawm al-Qiyamah. This is what drives them to give in charity and drives them to pray, when they think that they will meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and He will call them to account. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He specifically mentioned the belief in Yawm al-Qiyamah, in Yawm al-Hisab, in the day of recompense, because it is a very important tenet and a very important part of the belief of the believer, although it is implied in the previous ayat. وَالَّذِينَ يُصَدِّقُونَ بِيَوْمِ الدِّينِ وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ مِنْ عَذَابِ رَبِّهِمْ مُشْفِقُونَ. For they are mushfiqun. To be mushfiq of something is to dread something, or to fear something, or something which is impending. For they have a dread and they have a fear for the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that maybe the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will touch them because of an obligation which they did not do, or a sin that they committed. They always have this consciousness that maybe the adhab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will befall them, and they will be punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this dunya and in the akhirah. You do not know, subhanallah, one sin of yours could put you in the hellfire. You do not know. For do not look at the smallness of the sin, but look at the greatness of the one you have disobeyed. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is great, and He will punish for the sins if you do not seek forgiveness. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ مِنْ عَذَابِ رَبِّهِمْ مُشْفِقُونَ إِنَّ عَذَابَ رَبِّهِمْ غَيْرُ مَأْمُونَ. For the adhab of Rabb al-Alameen, the adhab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not ma'moon. It is not secure. It is not safe. No one is safe from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Can anyone walk around and claim, I am not going to be punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or I am clean of sins? Can anyone do this? For the one who is deceived by thinking that they are safe from the punishment of Allah may be the ones who will be punished first by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For do not feel secure from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For you always have this feeling that it could affect you, the adhab of Allah, and it could befall you, the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Shaykh al-Barraki said, do not be deceived by the amount of ibadah that you do. You're doing so much ibadah, how could Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punish you? Subhanallah, belittle your ibadah and think that there's always a deficiency in my ibadah, and it is only from the fadl of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He will accept this ibadah, whatever it may be, whether it is salat or zakat or the recitation of the Quran. The adhab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could befall anyone. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ. But this is another characteristic of the believer. They safeguard and they preserve their chastity and their furuj, their private parts. They do not engage in any kind of prohibited intimacy, such as fornication or adultery. Essentially it's a zina, but the zina is divided into two categories. There is the zina of the one who is married and the zina of the one who is not married. In English, the fornicator is the one who is not married, and the adulterer is the one who is married. The one who commits zina while being unmarried, they are lashed 100 times. But the one who is married and they commit zina, they have no excuse. The zina of the one who is married, their shar, their evil is widespread. But this is why their had is that they are stoned to death. And it includes fornication, adultery and homosexuality, or even al-jima' or the intercourse in the time of the menses of the woman. All of this is haram. And they also refrain from the asbab which lead to this as well. The looking and the hearing and the touching. All of this may lead to a zina, for they avoid these as well. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ إِلَّا عَلَىٰ أَزْوَاجِهِمْ أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ غَيْرُ مَلُومِينَ. For the exception to this, where you can be intimate in the halal way, is with your azwaj, with your wives. Yes, up to 4 of them if you want. And mulk al-yamin as well. Mulk al-yamin is the slave girl. For the slave girl is acquired through jihad. And there is no limit to how many slave girls you can have. But you must know that the slave girl, she does not have the same rights as the wife. But this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentioned the wives before the slave girls, mulk al-yamin. For they can be intimate with their wives and with their slave girls in the manner which is prescribed in the Shari'ah, and there is no blame on them. There is no blame. Allah will not call them to account for this. In fact, they will get rewarded. As the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, وَفِي بَضْعِ أَحَدِكُمْ صَدَقَةٌ وَفِي بَضْعِ أَحَدِكُمْ صَدَقَةٌ. In a man's sexual intimacy with his wife, there is a sadaqah. There is a reward in it. For the Sahaba, they were amazed. They said, even when we do it with our wives, we have a reward. He said, if you were to go and put it in haram, will you not get punished for that? For when you put it in the halal way, then you are being rewarded for it. And this is from the fadl of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِلَّا عَلَىٰ أَزْوَاجِهِمْ أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ غَيْرُ مَلُومِينَ فَمَنِ ابْتَغَىٰ وَرَاءَ ذَلِكَ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْعَادُونَ. فَمَنِ ابْتَغَىٰ, whoever looks and seeks beyond that. Yes, وَرَاءَ ذَلِكَ. And this ذَلِكَ returns to the wives and the mulk al-yamin, the wives and the slave girls. Whoever seeks to fulfill their intimacy in something other than their wives and in their slave girls, then they are from the aadun. They are the ones who have transgressed the bounds of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set the bounds. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the insan, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them these urges, and then He gave them the shari'i way, the halal way, to expel these urges and to fulfill these urges. Yes, so if you go and seek something other than this, then you will be called to blame. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will punish you for it, because it is a major sin when you fulfill your desire in other than your zawj and in your slave girl. Al-aadun are the ones who have transgressed the bounds of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He has set. فَمَنِ ابْتَغَىٰ وَرَاءَ ذَلِكَ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْعَادُونَ وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِأَمَانَاتِهِمْ وَعَهْدِهِمْ رَاعُونَ. This is another characteristic of the believers. They are ra'un. Ra'un means they look after and they keep and they maintain. For they are ra'un to their uhud and their amanat, or their amanat and their uhud. The amanat are the trusts. If someone gives them a trust, someone gives them an amana, they maintain it and they do not betray it, whatever the trust may be. If they trust them with a secret, they keep the secret. If they trust them with property to look after it, they look after it. If they trust them with wealth to look after, they look after it. They do not betray this trust, but they are ra'un to this trust. And similarly, the ahad is a covenant or a contract between any two people. If you write up a contract and it has these conditions of the contract. You must do this, and this other person must do this, and you must comply with this. You do not break your contract that you have given to someone else, for they uphold their contracts and they uphold their trusts as well. And this is khilaf al-munafiq. This is the opposite of the munafiq. But what did the Prophet ﷺ he say of the munafiq? He said of him, إِذَا حَدَّثَ كَذَبْ. When he speaks, he lies. وَإِذَا وَعَدَ أَخْلَفْ. When he makes a promise, he breaks his promise. وَإِذَا اؤْتُمِنَ خَانَ. When he is given a trust, he betrays the trust. وَإِذَا عَاهَدَ غَدَرَ. When he makes a covenant or a contract, he breaks the contract all the time. وَإِذَا خَاصَمَ فَجَرَ. When he argues with someone, he uses expletives and he uses swear words. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. For these are all sifat of the munafiqeen. For the one who upholds their amanat and their uhud, for this is from the sifat of the believers. And as the Shaykh al-Sa'di, he said, this includes the trusts between a person and Allah, namely the trust of upholding the Shari'ah, the taklifat of the Shari'ah. For this is a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you will uphold it. And also the uhud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, the ahd of the shahada. For when you say La ilaha illallah, this is a covenant between you and Allah that you will only worship Him and you will not worship anyone besides Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. For it includes the amanat and the uhud between the khalq and between the khaliq as well. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِأَمَانَاتِهِمْ وَعَهْدِهِمْ رَاعُونَ وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ بِشَهَادَاتِهِمْ قَائِمُونَ. Another characteristic of the believer, that their shahadat, the testimony that they give, they are qa'imun, they are upright, and they stand firm in their shahada. Yani they only give testimony concerning that which they know. They do not add to the shahada, and they do not decrease from the shahada, and they do not give false shahada, shahadat az-zur, and without showing any bias towards relatives or towards friends when they give a shahada. فالشهادة أمرها عظيم. The matter of the shahada is great because sometimes there are the huquq of people involved. For if you give a shahada, a false shahada, you may take from the haqq of someone, from the rights of someone. For the amr of the shahada is not something easy. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ بِشَهَادَاتِهِمْ قَائِمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَى صَلَاتِهِمْ يُحَافِظُونَ. Again, we started with the salah and now we end with the salah. For the mu'minun, the believers, they are hafidhun of their salat. They maintain their salat and they preserve their salat, and to them their salat is the most important thing, and they make their daily schedule around their salat. They don't make it an afterthought. Their salat is the most important thing. They uphold it and they maintain it and they look after it and they hold it in high regard. And when something happens to them regarding their salat, they feel a sense of emptiness inside them and a sense of loss. For like we mentioned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala started the mention of the characteristic of the believers with their steadfastness upon the salah and ended their mention with their maintaining of their salah. For this goes to show the great importance of the salah and that it is one of the greatest acts of worship in Islam. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَى صَلَاتِهِمْ يُحَافِظُونَ أُولَئِكَ فِي جَنَّاتٍ مُكْرَمُونَ. أُولَئِكَ يعني the believers. في جنات, they are in paradise. The jannat, the gardens of paradise. Mukramun, honored. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored them with Jannah and the eternal bliss of Jannah. ما لا عين رأت ولا أذن سمعت ولا خطر على قلب بشر. What no eye has seen and what no ear has heard and what no person has imagined before about Jannah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from the believers, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from Ahlul Jannah. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. We'll just quickly go over the points of benefit and the rulings. They're straightforward, inshallah. 1. That the characteristics which stem from Iman, with the most important being the prayer, purify a person from what they are naturally inclined towards, from evil characteristics such as impatience and anxiety. For when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentioned the impatience, He mentioned the exception as being إِلَّا الْمُصَلِّينَ. For when you have these characteristics of Iman, when you have these attributes of Iman, it purifies you from the evil characteristics and the evil attribute. 2. That salat and zakat are the best of deeds after Iman in regards to the majority of people. 3. That belief in the day of resurrection is the cause of righteous deeds. Belief in the day of resurrection without any accompanying deeds is delusion. وَالَّذِينَ يُصَدِّقُونَ بِيَوْمِ الدِّينِ. Why do they perform all their good deeds? Because they believe in Yawm al-Din. 4. That there is no security from the punishment of Allah in this world and in the hereafter except for the prophets and those who die upon Tawheed without being consistent upon the major sins. For these are the ones who are guaranteed safety and security from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The prophets and the one who dies upon Tawheed and stays away from the major sins. Because we don't know who these people are until we die. and we know whether we are safe from the punishment of Allah or not. And then we actually divided these fawaid and ahkam. So the next lot of fawaid and ahkam. 1. The virtues of safeguarding your chastity, and that it is from the attributes of the believers. 2. That keeping trusts and covenants is from the attributes of the believers. 3. That being upright in testimony is from the attributes of the believers. And 4. That paradise is made up of many gardens, each according to its rank. Al-Jannah is darajat. There are levels of Jannah, 100 levels of Jannah, as the Prophet ﷺ said. And each one contains gardens. For when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about Jannah, generally speaking, it includes all of the Jannat, all of the gardens of the Jannah. And when He's talking about Jannat, then He's specifically talking about the different Jannat in the ranks of paradise. For there is no contradiction when Allah sometimes says Jannah and sometimes says Jannat. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك وجزاكم الله خير.